The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I hate that I have to tell you this today. I really do. I take no pleasure in it. But at this point, it is the undeniable reality that the Oval Office and President Trump, the executive branch of the United States government, have been completely subjugated and taken over by Vladimir Putin and by Russia. And this became unendingly, just glaringly clear at yesterday's summit in Helsinki, Finland, and especially by the absolutely atrocious and embarrassing and shameful press conference that was given right after the private meeting between Trump and Putin. And I struggled today in planning the segment because it's hard to know, where do you even start with this? And it was, I watched the press conference. It was one of the most disgusting and vile performances by an American president in American history, I would argue. And the question is no longer if Trump is a subordinate of Putin. It's more a question of why has he become a subordinate of Putin? To what extent is he a captive of the Russians? And how do we fix it? That's really thinking pragmatically, that's the number one question. And I admit that I didn't expect the meeting was going to go well, but the historic low that was this press conference given by Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump is, as I said, of historic proportions. And during the press conference, there was a direct question about Russian interference in the 2016 election, which at this point is an undeniable reality. We know that. Donald Trump, in his answer, asked specifically about, do you blame Putin? Do you blame the guy or don't you? Trump blamed everyone but the people who actually did the interfering. He blamed Democrats, of course, Hillary Clinton, why not? The FBI, Robert Mueller, a witch hunt investigation, a Pakistani dude, but not Vladimir Putin and Russia. And it is one of the most disgusting acts that I can remember by an American president, certainly during my lifetime during which I've been paying attention to politics, but it's actually even worse than I've described it to you up until this point. Donald Trump went further and said that Putin had a great idea, which was to have Russian officials work with Robert Mueller on the investigation into Russian meddling. Russian actors are some of the perpetrators. And Putin says, let me have the perpetrators work with the investigator. And Trump called it, quote, an incredible offer from Vladimir Putin. Let's go to one of these clips, and a lot of the stuff I just mentioned is in it. I can't even keep track.
Thank you. Question for each president. President Trump, yes. You first. Just now, President Putin denied having anything to do with the election interference in 2016. Every U.S. intelligence agency has concluded that Russia did. My first question for you, sir, is who do you believe? My second question is, would you now, with the whole world watching, tell President Putin, would you denounce what happened in 2016, and would you warn him to never do it again?
So let me just say that we have two thoughts. You have groups that are wondering why the FBI never took the server. Why haven't they taken the server? Why was the FBI told to leave the office of the Democratic National Committee? I've been wondering that. I've been asking that for months and months, and I've been tweeting it out and calling it out on social media.
And nobody knows
where is the server? I want to know, where is the server, and what is the server saying? With that being said, all I can do is ask the question. My people came to me, Dan Coates came to me, and some others. They said they think it's Russia. I have President Putin. He just said it's not Russia. I will say this. I don't see any reason why it would be, but I really do want to see the server. But I have confidence in both parties. I really believe that this will probably go on for a while, but I don't think it can go on without finding out what happened to the server. What happened to the servers of the Pakistani gentlemen that worked on the DNC? Where are those servers? They're missing. Where are they? What happened to Hillary Clinton's emails? 33,000 emails, gone, just gone. I think in Russia they wouldn't be gone so easily. I think it's a disgrace that we can't get Hillary Clinton's 33,000 emails. So I have great confidence in my intelligence people.
Yeah, it shows.
But I will tell you that President Putin was extremely strong and powerful in his denial today. And what he did is an incredible offer. He offered to have the people working on the case come and work with their investigators with respect to the 12 people. I think that's an incredible offer. Okay?
So the question is, do you blame Putin? Do you hold him accountable? Everybody knows it was Russia. Do you blame him? He says, the FBI did bad things. The DNC did bad things. Servers are a problem. Putin said it wasn't him. I have confidence in both Putin and our intelligence. This is going to go on for a while. Servers are a problem. A Pakistani guy is a problem. Hillary's emails are a problem. He praises Russia, slams his own intelligence community. He refers to Putin as strong and powerful and says Putin has made an incredible offer. It's over. This might as well be the Constitution of the United States, Pat. It's over. Oh, how do you put this into words?
Yeah, I don't know if you really can. And I love that part about, Putin's going to be in charge of dealing with Robert Mueller and trying to get to the bottom of all of this. It's kind of like regulatory capture in a way, like what Trump is doing with all his executive agencies. Like, let's put the climate change denier in charge of the Department of Energy.
Yeah.
Let's put the Colbert in charge of, the EPA.
Let's
like,
put
this is the last person you want in charge of this.
Put the mom of an alleged terrorist in charge of the investigation into the terrorist. Why not, right? I'm sure she'll have incredibly valuable information to add about her son. This is actually in line with what Trump wanted all along. He wanted to be in control of the Mueller investigation. Putting Russia in on the Mueller investigation is sort of the next best thing. And the president believes Vladimir Putin over our own intelligence agencies. This is the perfect response if you are Putin, right? If you're Putin and you're standing there and they go to the other guy and they say, do you hold this man accountable? And Trump says it was servers, a Pakistani, Hillary's emails, and this man was just so strong and powerful. And then he says he has no reason to think that it would be Russia. Despite all of our intelligence agencies saying it was Russia, despite all of the other evidence that we have, he just says, well, Putin says it wasn't them. It just wasn't them. And if everybody who has stated an opinion on this, the only person telling the truth, if you believe Donald Trump, is Vladimir Putin, the person accused of the actual wrongdoing. So our country has been taken over. We are no longer in control. We are no longer sovereign. And the major question to be answered is why? And we have a poll on our YouTube channel asking this right now. Was Trump bribed? Was Trump compromised by Russia because they have really damaging things on him? We're going to talk about that a little bit later. Is Trump just this open to suggestion? Like, is he this manipulable? Or is he doing this because he's being blackmailed? I don't know the answer, but the White House is being subjugated by a foreign power. We suspected it for a while, but the press conference yesterday has confirmed it beyond any doubt. And I'm increasingly thinking that Putin and the Russians may indeed have career-ending dirt on Donald Trump. And I mean not pee-pee tapes. I mean something even worse that I don't even know what it would be, because this is the total subjugation of a supposed big, tough American president by Vladimir Putin.
It's got to be something, right? Because they receive no criticism ever. The European Union, they're apparently the biggest foe to the United States. Canada
France,
ripping
Germany,
us off on trade deals.
They're terrible.
NATO, maybe we should pull out. But Putin, no, he denies election meddling strongly.
Not a single criticism. Not a single criticism. And this is an emergency. This is an emergency. Red alert. This is a man who has to be removed from office because we have a president siding with a hostile foreign power in direct opposition to our own intelligence community. It's traitorous behavior. When we imagined the worst case scenario, this is it, and it's a reality, and we have to contend with it now, and I don't know what we do next. I do want to focus in a little bit on one more specific component of the Trump-Putin summit and press conference, and it centers around compromising material. The entire press conference was a gong show of Donald Trump basically being subjugated by Putin, being the beta to Putin's alpha, and it was embarrassing in every way. I hesitate to use the C word. I know people don't like it, but the guy was cucked. The guy was cucked. I don't know how else to say it. And at the end of the press conference, Putin was asked straight up, do you have compromising material on Trump? Whether it's the PP tapes of the Steele dossier fame or something else. And Vladimir Putin very coyly did not deny it. And let's listen to Putin's answer, of course, through a live translator.
And now to the compromising material. Yeah, I did heard these rumors that we allegedly collected compromising material on Mr. Trump when he was visiting Moscow. Well, distinguished colleague, let me tell you this. When President Trump visited Moscow back then, I didn't even know that he was in Moscow. I treat President Trump with utmost respect, but back then, when he was a private individual, a businessman, nobody informed me that he was in Moscow. Well, let's take St. Petersburg Economic Forum, for instance. There were over 500 American businessmen, the high-ranking, the high-level ones. I don't even remember the last names of each and every one of them. Well, do you remember, do you think that we try to collect compromising material on each and every single one of them? Well, it's difficult to imagine another nonsense of a bigger scale than this. Well, please just disregard these issues and don't think about this anymore again.
So, not a single denial. Putin asked, do you have compromising material on Trump? He says, I didn't know Trump was in Moscow at the time in question. I respect Trump. I heard about the rumor about compromising material. I wasn't informed that Trump was in Moscow. There were lots of other businessmen here as well, and I don't know all of their names. It would be tough to collect damaging material on all of those people, and please disregard and don't think about this anymore. Not denials. And the question is Putin playing coy because he wants to be vague about whether he has this stuff? Or, and this occurred to me this morning, Pat, when we were talking about it, is it possible that Putin is playing coy because even Trump himself doesn't know whether Putin has the material? Is it possible that Trump knows he did do something in Russia, which if it were filmed would be embarrassing, but he genuinely doesn't know if it was recorded?
Yeah, and Putin, knowing that Trump doesn't know, can take advantage of that situation too.
Exactly right. Just another possibility. And then maybe the most bizarre moment of the entire thing, and there were many, this answer from Putin seemed to panic Donald Trump. And he immediately, well, we're going to play for you. The 24 seconds we're about to play for you happened right after what you just heard. Trump responds with a very strange tirade about FBI agent Peter Strzok, a move that seems to like totally reflexive panic from Trump. Take a look.
I have to say, if they had it, it would have been out long ago. And if anybody watched Peter Strzok testify over the last couple of days, and I was in Brussels watching it, it was a disgrace to the FBI. It was a disgrace to our country. And you would say that was a total witch hunt. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
What does Peter Strzok have to do with this? It's just, I guess, an opportunity to attack the FBI. And those last 10 seconds kind of sum up the entire thing. Absolute and total irrational panic by Trump combined with whataboutism. So long story short, no denial from Putin that they have compromising material. Putin may be playing coy, maybe Putin reminding Trump that he'd better behave. Send me your thoughts about what is a very, very strange moment. I'm on Twitter at dpacman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show, and it is a very, very full day of news today.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is David Fielding. David, thank you. I really appreciate your support, very much so. I also really appreciate the support of Tom Forsyth. Tom has been a member since 2012, almost 6 years of membership. He's been with us longer than a lot of things. I don't know. I was trying to come up with some clever analogy. Longer than Trump's going to be president of the United States, but I actually don't know. The guy could win a second term. I don't know. David, Tom, thank you. Join them at www.joinpakman.com or make a pledge on Patreon for as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Okay, it is time for audience democracy. Make a note, Pat. We have been talking for a while about this back and forth on live calls on the show. Fridays, we take live calls and we don't screen calls, and that's both good and bad. It's good in the sense that if people want to criticize me or challenge me, they're free to do it. The downside of not screening calls is that sometimes the call quality is not as good as some people in the audience would like it to be. Generally, people seem to either like calls as a good part of the show or absolutely hate them. There aren't that many people who are just so taken with the live calls. But there's people that like the calls as one of many show segments, and people who really want them to go. We had a whole discussion and back and forth. Do we keep live calls? Do we shrink them? Do we expand them? People saying, we'll get a call screener. We can't do that right now. The way our system is set up, just not set up to screen calls individually ahead of time. Lately, I feel like the calls have been better. But overall, there's still some times where it's not so great. And I'm working to improve my skills at handling the live calls.
Yeah, we've also recently upgraded our system too. So now the questions are less rambly, and I think there's more variety to the questions too, so they have improved.
Now when you call in, you immediately get a pre-recorded message that says, please get directly to your question and like have your question written down and so on and so forth. Anyway, we are going to combine the decision about whether we do live calls or end live calls forever with the Patreon fundraiser where we're trying to get to 2,000 patrons, okay? This is the way it's going to work. And I think this has the potential to either be an incredibly amazing progressive media endeavor of democracy and freedom of choice or something, fill in the blanks, or this could backfire horribly in ways that I could not even predict ahead of time. So here's the way it's going to work. If you want live calls to stay, you make a pledge of any amount ending in 1 penny on Patreon, okay? So you could make a pledge of $1.01 or $2.01, doesn't matter, right? Right now, there are no pledges that end in 1 cent. So going forward, from this point forward, any pledge on Patreon for $1.01, $2.01, $3.01, whatever, that counts as a vote to keeping live calls. All right. The way to do this is when you go to patreon.com/David Pakman Show, you hit the orange become a patron button. And then what you have to do is you scroll down in the list of pledge levels all the way to the bottom where it says custom pledge. And there you type it in. Could be $1.01, $2.01, whatever. OK, every .01 pledge is a vote for live calls. If you don't want live calls, end your pledge in 0.02. You make a pledge of $1.02 or $2.02 or, I don't know, $1,000.02. If you never want to hear live calls again, this is the time to make your voice heard. And if you like the live calls, this is the time to get active so that we keep it. And of course, in the background of all this is that we're about 130 patrons away from hitting 2,000, at which point, and we have really been building this up, I think it's going to be great, I will be live streaming a chess match against a joint producer team of producer Max and producer Pat, who will be playing against me in a game of chess. And to the victor go the spoils, and so on and so forth. I don't know exactly what those spoils will be. Maybe like a free membership to an online chess site or something like that. Which I guess I'd be buying for myself, so it's kind of weird. But I think people will enjoy seeing the chess face-off. So you want live calls, make any pledge ending in 0.01 at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. If you never want more live calls to be aired again, and I know some of you don't, make a pledge ending in 0.02. We will give it, we give it a week, right, for the voting?
Yeah, a week sounds good to me. You know, my credit limit is $5,000. I'm going to ask to get it upgraded to $5,001.
Yes.
That way I can vote to keep the live calls.
At the level of $5,001.
Sure.
Yeah, I like that. All right. Pat, we'll talk about that after. Terrible financial idea. But I appreciate the sentiment. Okay, get the votes in. I will update you later in the week, and then we'll give it a week from today. Next Tuesday, we will make the announcement. Huge moment in the Trump-Russia investigation yesterday that isn't actually part of Robert Mueller's Trump-Russia investigation, but actually just related to Russians and Republicans and the NRA and the 2016 election. And this is a confusing story. This story is confusing a lot of people about what it means. So I want, in the interest of clarity this evening, to explain it to you as clearly as possible. Yesterday, a 29-year-old Russian woman named Maria Butina was charged with conspiracy to act as an agent of the Russian Federation in the United States without prior notification to the Attorney General. What does this mean in layman's terms? A Russian person was in the U.S. as an agent of Russia officially, but didn't register as such. This is similar to what other people involved in the Trump-Russia investigation have been accused of, which is working for foreign governments without being registered agents for those governments. And the general The complaint form from the Justice Department alleges, quote, the court filings detail the Russian officials and Butina's efforts for Butina to act as an agent of Russia inside the United States by developing relationships with U.S. persons and infiltrating organizations having influence in American politics for the purpose of advancing the interests of the Russian Federation. The filings also describe certain actions taken by Butina to further this effort during multiple visits from Russia and later when she entered and resided in the United States on a student visa. The filings allege that she undertook her activities without officially disclosing the fact that she was acting as an agent of Russian government as required by law. The next question is, who was she meeting with? And hopefully we will learn that. But the story is made even better because a video has been uncovered from 2015 where the same woman, Maria Butina, actually asks now President Donald Trump a question at an event called Freedom Fest. And it gets even better than that because in his answer, Trump says he knows Putin. And this was 2015. It was before Trump had subsequently denied knowing Vladimir Putin. It is yet another time that Trump seems to be caught in that lie, whatever the truth was at the time. Check out this stunning video of this woman who was just indicted talking to Donald Trump at Freedom Fest.
Okay, let's go.
Sorry?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm visiting from Russia. So my question...
Putin. Good friend of Obama, Putin. He likes Obama a lot. Go ahead.
My question will be about foreign politics.
Okay.
If you would be elected as a president, what will be your foreign politics, especially in the relationships with my country? And do you want to continue the politics of sanctions that are damaging of both economy, or you have any other ideas?
Okay. Obama gets along with nobody. The whole world hates us. You know, it's an amazing thing. You look at Mexico, they hate us, they hate our leadership, and yet they're making a fortune. China hates us. China is building ports in the South China Sea. We could never do a thing like that because we'd have to get environmental impact statements, okay? So we're... I jokingly said to a friend, do you think they got an environmental impact statement when they did? So China hates us. And yet they're making, everybody hates us, and yet they make money with us. With me, we're going to make money on them, and they're going to like us. I know Putin, and I'll tell you what, we get along with Putin. Putin has no respect for President Obama. Big problem. Big problem. And Russia has been driven, you know, I've always heard, for years I've heard, one of the worst things that can happen to our country is if Russia ever gets driven to China. We have driven them together with the big oil deals that are being made.
Wow. And Trump says in this same video, he would probably lift sanctions on Putin because he just wouldn't need them.
I believe I would get along very nicely with Putin, okay? And I mean where we have the strength. I don't think you'd need the sanctions. I think that we would get along very, very well.
Stunning. Truly, truly stunning what's going on. And once again, I want to say this a second time because it's important. This is not part of the Mueller investigation. This is a totally separate investigation. So consider the advancement here. We had Americans indicted, Michael Flynn, Paul Manafort, but the idea was they didn't do stuff directly with Russia during the campaign. Then we had Russians indicted, but they were in Russia doing cyber meddling. They weren't here in the United States doing stuff in person. We now have a Russian working on the behalf of the Russian government in the United States without disclosing that they are working as an agent of Russia, who's accused of infiltrating organizations that have influence on American politics, specifically to advance Russian interests. And if you look at the affidavit in support of these charges, they're pretty ominous because they include references to both the political party, apparently the Republican Party, and a gun rights organization, likely the NRA, and that's a link that we've been tracking for months. Quote, on October 4, 2016, U.S. person 1 sent an email to an acquaintance. The email covered a number of topics. Within the email, U.S. person 1 stated, unrelated to specific presidential campaigns, I've been involved in securing a very private line of communication between the Kremlin and key political party 1 leaders through, of all conduits, the gun rights organization, which is redacted. This is stunning, and it builds even more. Because remember those reports we did on the link between Russia and Trump and the NRA? This is at least the Russia NRA component. We have a picture of Maria Butina posing at NRA headquarters with the NRA president at the time, David Keene. Here she is with NRA's Wayne LaPierre in a picture we are showing our television audience. Here she is with Senator Rick Santorum, another big NRA advocate. Also pictured with Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal, a big gun guy. This is a treasure trove, and the story is building daily, and it is yet another one of these stories from months ago, which we've been covering. Russia funneling money through the NRA to Donald Trump. Pieces are falling into place every single day, if not week. More and more pieces fall into place, and now we have an actual Russian indicted for actions within the United States. What will we know in 2 weeks, Pat? That is the question. I think we're going to know a lot. Discuss this with us on our subreddit at davidpakman.com/REDDIT. Quick break. Luke Vargas joins us next from Helsinki. He's not just there hanging out. He was there for the Trump Putin summit. And I've got a lot of questions for Luke coming up next.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to be joined today by Luke Vargas, Chief Foreign Correspondent for Talk Media News, joining us today from Helsinki, Finland, after wrapping up a week in the Baltic and attending, of course, yesterday's Trump Putin. I guess we're calling it a meeting. I don't really know what the right way to sort of characterize it. Finland, Luke, what's it like? What is the context of Finland and sort of thinking about our relationship with Russia?
Well, first, let me say I love Finland. And I have found the language to be the most difficult thing about this country, except for this headline in the paper today.
Trump 0, Putin 1, yeah.
It's the only thing in Finnish that I can understand, and I guess a fitting souvenir for this trip. This wasn't a summit, was it? We'll get to that in a second. There was no agenda, no actual deal to be signed here. Finland as a host has been described over and over as a neutral country, which, having talked to a lot of experts here, is something they sort of reject. This is a country in the European Union that's adopted the euro and that does drills with NATO, but also has an 800-plus mile-long border with Russia. And that's very important because it sort of sets up a Finnish model for how to deal with Russia appropriately that I think President Trump, in his press conference yesterday, decided not to follow. Namely, that you have to pursue a working relationship with Russia when you're Finland. You can't afford to not talk, to not have cooperation between border guards and militaries. You need to understand your partner here, but that also means you can take decisions. You can pivot to the West, or you can decide not to. And in this country, they have pivoted to the West. But they also call out Putin, and yet they still find a way to have a decent relationship. So a working relationship, not necessarily friendly relations. And that takes us to President Trump's argument here that the reason that Russian relations are being reset now, of all times, is because these are nuclear countries that together have 90% of the nuclear, or whatever Trump says, and that because of the importance of nuclear weapons control and the importance of fighting terrorism, that is a reason these countries have to bury the past, forget all the things that separate them, and just focus on finding common ground. And those in Finland would say that's a false choice. And I do think the proposition from Trump is insincere and posits that nothing can be done on arms control when there isn't just daylight, no daylight between the countries, and that nothing can happen on fighting terrorism together, as if law enforcement wouldn't pass along a tip to another country if there's a bona fide terror risk. So I think that's the false choice that has bothered me coming out of this summit.
Yeah, I mean, when it's hard to forget the past when the past includes already starting to meddle in the midterms, like as recently as yesterday, because that's maybe not far enough in the past to be able to do that. So the press conference, this was one of the most bizarre and quite frankly disgusting performances I've ever seen by an American president, certainly during the time I've been following politics. And, you know, I was doing the show during the George W. Bush administration, so that says quite a bit. But on style, What was it like in the room? Because what was transmitted through my multiple watches of this thing and preparing for the show, it was a totally subservient Trump in the context of his relationship to Vladimir Putin. Did that come through in the room, or was it a different feel?
I think it did, because many of those, including myself, who were in the room, are experienced with having traveled with U.S. presidents around the world and seeing the traditional manner in which U.S. presidents talk to foreign heads of state, and particularly foreign heads of state from less than democratic countries, of which Russia would certainly fit the mold. And typically what you see is the U.S. president making a calculation, sort of a deal with the foreign leader, saying, though probably never saying it explicitly, if you want to share the stage with me, then you're going to need to take some questions. Obama did this with the Chinese, with the Cubans. They try to squiggle out of the questions. Obama insists they answer questions from the media. And Trump yesterday really did the opposite. It was an inversion of that typical relationship. He's shielding President Putin from certain questions. It's almost teeing him up. It's like, for those of us in radio, he's like a perfect co-host, right? He like kind of senses the ad break is coming and then like fixes his remarks to give the host a way to do his live read. It really felt like Trump, especially answering or in his prepared remarks on the election, sort of saying, yeah, I brought it up. I wanted to deal with this one-on-one, but Putin has a lot to say about it. He's got some really interesting theories. Like, there you go, buddy. I felt that style to be very odd. And there was no reciprocation. And that was very noteworthy, that Putin, even though Trump was treating him with kid gloves, still criticized the United States on the Iran deal, saying, look, the Iran deal has made the world safer. It's working. And actually criticizing the U.S. on deployment of anti-missile systems in Eastern Europe, which to me was maybe one of those things Putin slipped in there to try and see, does Trump bite? Does he know the details here? Is this something he might push back against? Of course, Trump, if he caught it, didn't have anything to counter it with. And I worry, actually, that was a little bit of an indication, as we talk about substance, of maybe what Trump may have requested from, or rather Putin requested from Trump in their one-on-one. I mean, here we get an idea of a possible Russian complaint, much like Kim Jong-un complains about joint military drills with South Korea. Maybe Putin said, hey, you've got anti-missile systems protecting the Baltic and Poland. Pull those back from Eastern Europe. They're a nuisance to us. So that's something I would watch. And again, it was not a reciprocal relationship between Trump and Putin. Putin got some barbs in against Trump.
So transitioning sort of to substance, but it's still kind of related to style, and you can take this the direction that makes sense. The moment where Trump referred to Putin's idea of collaborating with Russian officials on the Mueller investigation and calling it an incredible idea, which struck me as maybe one of the most absurd suggestions Trump has made during this presidency so far. What was the mood like in the room where Trump called that an incredible idea?
I will say, and I wish I had more anecdotes about the spirit in the room. I mean, I think the Russian press corps hardly makes a peep no matter what. I guess if Putin laughs, they all laugh along with him. But, and I think the U.S. press corps, to be fair, is so used to Trump's antics at this point that we don't make a huge, verbal much to do about certain things. So I can't really even remember what the instant reaction was to that. But I think, you're starting to get at parts of this press conference that I do think they sort of maybe sound like one thing, but then you really consider what they mean and it becomes absurd. The other one jumps to mind for me is these two leaders suggesting they're going to have business representatives get together and find out how to do more business between the two countries, which is really against the spirit of the whole sanctions regime, which is, meant to really make Russia pay a financial price for its misdeeds in places like Ukraine and, poisonings in Europe, in the United Kingdom.
Alleged poisonings, Luke, alleged poisonings with chemicals known only to come from 2 different places on the planet.
Yeah, but I guess my other big point on the substance of the conversation is that, if it weren't for these two very dogged American reporters from Reuters and Associated Press who just made sure extra questions got asked in what was supposed to be or otherwise would have been a very short press conference, let's just look at the prepared statement from Trump and consider this is what he thought was acceptable at an absolute minimum to have communicated. Let's say, for instance, if the two questioners had just, talked about the Space Force and, something else that's random like the World Cup, and we never got into the meat. Trump would never have mentioned Ukraine, and he actually didn't. The only question follows up on that word to Putin. He never talked about Crimea. He never talked about the Skripal poisoning. He never talked about Assad. He ended up actually praising Russia on its relationship with Iran, which just seems very odd. And I will say, finally, we don't know exactly what was agreed to. Major agreements can be made in 2 sentences behind closed doors and may well have been made. And so it's one thing to sort of say that we fully understand Trump by reading the transcript, but that's never how Trump works. And I think we should be afraid about maybe the deals that were made behind the scenes that we may never know about.
That is absolutely what I've been thinking about. Before you went to Finland, you also were in Latvia and Estonia. You visited NATO troops, politicians. I'm actually going to be in Estonia in a few months as part of a project that I'm super interested in what that's like. But in the context of the Trump-Putin bromance, we could call it, or maybe the cuckoldry that is going on, is this something that should be concerning for those allies in the region?
Well, nothing happened yesterday from the people I've talked to in the Baltic region that amounted to, let's say, a humiliating concession that truly undermined them. We did not see President Trump, for instance, saying he was going to veto further expansion of NATO, which is one thing Russia wants. Nor did the U.S. Or President Trump agree to some sort of forced posture change for the U.S. military, agree to suspend joint military drills in the Baltic, or really even critique NATO. He reserved that for earlier in the week. And yet the Baltic probably remains the most vulnerable to Trump's temperament as it pertains to his views on NATO. This is a region that has now a deterrence in the form of these forward battle groups, of which the U.S. has one in Poland that it oversees, which, according to most people I've talked to, and which I witnessed firsthand, do seem to be acting as a very strong deterrent against some sort of Russian aggression there. Those kind of vulnerabilities could come right back into play if Trump, let's say, carries through on a threat, as he apparently made in Brussels, to perhaps sort of go it alone outside of NATO if those countries don't meet these exceedingly difficult to reach spending targets by year's end, which won't happen. I will also say the country that probably, if we take the Baltic out of it, that is most concerned about what happened yesterday, it will be Ukraine, which got no support, no verbal support from President Trump. We don't even know if it was brought up in their meeting. And I will say, in fact, the only time Ukraine is mentioned yesterday, they are criticized by Putin, and Trump doesn't stand up for them. Putin says, look, it's actually Ukraine which isn't living up to the Minsk agreement. And there are some things they're not doing. They're not making public services, let's say, very accessible for certain people in the Donbass and eastern Ukraine. And then Putin chides Trump, saying you need to put pressure on Ukraine to live up to their commitments. That is so lopsided. It's got to be driving policymakers in Ukraine mad.
Last thing, Luke, in the limited time we have, my sort of highlights from this Europe trip for Trump are shows up, suggests the idea of maybe leaving NATO to different degrees of directness, single-handedly torpedoes a significant portion of our relationship with Germany, which has been an ally of the United States for a long time, and then indicates that he is totally subservient to Vladimir Putin. Am I missing any of the highlights? Like, are those the lasting implications of this trip?
I think you're getting at them. How I would sum it up is that the U.S. and Russia have long had very different views about, whether they want to be in a neighborhood of similar nations or whether they want to go it alone and try and pursue, let's say, bilateral relationships with other countries where they have more influence. And I think what we've seen over the past week is convergence there, that now both the U.S. and Russia have designs to divide and conquer or divide and overpower Europe. Trump wants to do this economically. He finds the European Union to be a nuisance. He would rather make individual bilateral trade deals, not just with them, but with everyone around the world instead of working through multilateral frameworks. Putin wants to do this through foreign policy, much like the pipeline you may have talked about last week with Angela Merkel, which sort of cuts out the Baltic, allows Russia to have more one-on-one threats that they can make to different countries to cut off their energy supply. Putin sees things the same way. Trump may not know this is exactly what he's doing, but and the leaders are probably doing this for different reasons, but it's certainly happening. And finally, I would say, partisanship has been injected into foreign policy in a major way by President Trump. And he admitted it himself, sort of saying, the reason I had this meeting, the reason I'm making relations better with Putin right now is because Democrats said I shouldn't. I forget his exact phrasing, but something along the lines of, I can't set foreign policy based on Democrats who want nothing but obstructionism. He can take that tact, but it has huge ripple effects for the future diplomacy of the United States, because it makes, not just for Republicans, but for Democrats, any future successes in the diplomatic realm more difficult to actually implement, because then immediately as you come back home from abroad, even a good deal that's been signed is going to be seen as a win for President Trump or a win for a future Democrat instead of a win for America and its foreign policy. And I think that change and the one about the U.S. and Russia starting to both agree on wanting to divide, split up Europe and deal with countries so they have maximum advantage one-on-one. Those are big takeaways that truly shift the way America acts in the world.
Follow Luke on Twitter at The Courier. Luke Vargas is the chief foreign correspondent for Talk Media News, joining us today from Helsinki, Finland.
In a makeshift sauna here.
in a makeshift, incredibly hot room. So we're going to end the interview so Luke can towel off. Luke, thank you as always.
Thank you, David. Bye-bye.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
This is possibly my favorite Jordan Peterson clip ever. If you don't know Jordan Peterson, he's the University of Toronto professor who I think now is on hiatus or at least sabbatical from the university. He came to prominence because he was opposed to this bill called C-16. It was related to transgender pronouns. And for our purposes today, we don't even really have to go that far back and give you the full genesis of Jordan Peterson. We're here today, and he's currently part of this pseudo movement called the intellectual dark web. It's kind of a movement, even though it's not totally clear everybody who's ostensibly part of it acknowledges being part of it. I don't even know what to call it.
I like calling it the rebranding of bad ideas.
Yes, it's a collective of sorts, and he lectures around the world, sometimes with Dave Rubin, with different people. So to cut to the important thing for today, one of Peterson's big topics is that forcing equality of outcome in our world is unnatural. And I actually agree with him, right? And he goes further and says that government and society should not act to totally level out outcomes in a forced way. And he usually applies this to things like affirmative action or income distribution or equal pay between men and women or other topics. And I don't totally disagree with him on this issue in the sense that when you look at any human endeavor, there is a natural distribution. I don't know of any human endeavor where everybody is the same, other than eventually everybody dies. But even on that, people die at very different ages and at in different circumstances. So I agree with him that totally enforcing like an actual equality of outcome doesn't make sense. I focus on policies that would ensure equality of opportunity. Lots of examples from him about this, but he is about equality of opportunity and not equality of outcome. One area that he is also sort of making a name in is the topic of incels. And if you don't know what incels are, incel is sort of an abbreviation of involuntarily celibate. It means you want to have sex, but involuntarily you're not able to find someone to have sex with, so you're not having sex. And to summarize, Jordan Peterson thinks that that's bad. He says it destabilizes society. He has sometimes pointed out that some of the shooters and terrorists that have committed horrible acts were incels. And so he's floated this idea of trying to correct the problem of people being involuntarily celibate. And you can characterize the plan in different ways, but the idea is to have some kind of way where these guys who, by virtue of the free market, are having a real hard time generating romantic encounters for themselves, they would somehow be able to have sex. And this is actually a form of equality of outcome. Yep. Equality of outcome, which he claims to oppose. And he just about went wacky on the Joe Rogan show until he realized how that's not something he can really say because it goes against everything he's been arguing about for years. So here's one example of how Jordan Peterson is against enforcing equality of outcome.
The really deadly leftist presumption is equality of outcome.
Right.
I think as soon as you start talking about equality of outcome, you should be put in a box and put off the shelf. But it isn't obvious why. Like, that doesn't sound like, white people overall. It doesn't have the same guttural punch that the excess of the right has.
Right. So bear that in mind. He's clearly against equality of outcome being the sort of target for policy. And here we go. Check out this to understand what this is going to be. He now is talking about how there is this uneven distribution of sexual activity. And there's some men having a lot of sex, and there's some men having none at all, which, of course, when it's in economics or academic achievement or creative endeavors, Jordan Peterson says it's natural and healthy. This is how human endeavors organize themselves. There's a distribution. And Joe Rogan points out, wait a second. If you want to enforce some way for the incels to have sex, it's kind of like the equality of outcome you claim to oppose.
What happens is that a small minority of men have all the sexual opportunity. A fairly large minority of men don't. The women are unhappy because they can't find a committed relationship. It's bad for most of the men. And the men who have all the sexual opportunity get cynical.
But isn't this in some ways against your whole idea of equality of outcome? Because you're talking about equality of sexual outcome now.
So now he's saying, actually, I am not okay with unregulated inequality when it comes to sexual encounters. We have to regulate, or as he calls it, rectify it. And this is the key part.
If these men, if you have a guy like a LeBron James, that's a dominant basketball player that just kicks everyone's ass, this is a guy who succeeded at the highest level, right? Well, there's going to be people like that sexually. There's going to be people that are better at finding mates, and this is what they enjoy. They enjoy having many mates.
Yep,
they enjoy being, yes, but if this is what they enjoy, if it's a man who doesn't want a family and enjoys dating multiple women, why is that bad?
Well, I think the fundamental reason it's bad is because it's bad in the long run for children.
So he's saying there is a broader reason why that's bad. It's bad that there's this uneven distribution of outcomes when it comes to finding people to have sex with. And then this is the key part. This is the key part where it looks like he almost gets, wait a second, this is totally antithetical to my views on equality of outcome on just about every other issue.
Rectify that.
But how could you possibly rectify that if one man is, like, say if we've got one 6'5" beautiful man who's got a perfect body and he's brilliant and he just wants to date a bunch of women, and all the rest of the people are 5'1" and they're fat and they're lazy, and like this guy's gonna, if this is the competition, he's going to win. There's no way around this, and even if you decide to have enforced monogamy, where it becomes a popular thing, the women are going to be more drawn to him. If he chooses to date them, they might decide, I would rather have him sometimes than never at all.
That is actually what does happen.
But what is wrong with that?
Well, what's wrong with it is that it destabilizes society and it's bad for children.
Right, you said that.
Yeah, but
what if they don't want to have children? But there's a lot of people that don't want to have children. There's a lot of people that choose to go their entire life without having children. There's men in their 30s. Some of my friends have vasectomies. They don't want children. So why would that help in any way, these involuntary celibates?
Well, I think you tilt the society so that it serves the interests of, well, that's a good question.
That's the best. Whoa. I can't say that. You tilt society so it serves the greatest good. So, for example, you take from the rich and you give to the poor to eliminate poverty, which reduces crime and increases life expectancy, and it's best for society as a whole, but it's not quite so good for those few rich people who get the money taken away. This is like an aha moment where Jordan Peterson realizes, oh, wait a second, it's totally antithetical to everything I've been espousing and on which I've gotten famous. And I know that the Peterson fanboys, Pat, are going to say, I'm misrepresenting what he meant. I'm mischaracterizing what he said. I lack the intelligence to even understand what argument it is. But this is by definition, enforced monogamy, right? Or whatever solution he wants to these incels. That ensures an unnatural outcome, which is much more equal than what the free market of society would dictate.
Yeah, there's really no defending this, and I think he was caught here. Silver lining, Jordan Peterson can admit when he's wrong. You know, he did that with the gay marriage cake debacle in the Jim Jeffries interview. Yeah,
I didn't know that.
So maybe you'll say that, hey, I didn't think this one through, and I've actually come around, and I realized that my views here were inconsistent.
I'm ready and waiting anytime, and he's welcome back on the program anytime. He was interviewed on this program before, by the way. You can find that online. From day one, since the great victory of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in her New York Democratic primary, I have expressed concern about her lack of depth when it comes to many issues. And the way that that translates into her candidacy is that I was afraid that when she would get questioned in more detail about some of her views, it wouldn't go well. And that unfortunately has happened. She was interviewed on a PBS show called Firing Line, and it became cringe-worthily obvious that she was sort of speaking about things she doesn't know much about when she was asked about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And she was asked, what's your position on Israel? And eventually she was asked to elaborate. And it was a combination of misstatements and looking around in a confused manner, silence, and just outright confusion about what seems to be going on in the region, followed by, at the end, one of these disclaimers that she's not actually an expert on this, so why is she even being asked? Now, before I play the clip, I want to clarify something. I don't dislike Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. This has nothing to do with my view on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I think I have a lot in common with her view on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I think it's okay to use the word occupation with regard to some of what's going on there. And I already predict people writing in and saying, David, you're a Jew Zionist and you just don't like that she called Israel occupiers. That's not the problem. The problem is that when she was asked what she meant, she vaguely mentioned settlements when the real issue around occupation is Gaza and the West Bank. And this is not a small detail. It's sort of the detail. It's really difficult to watch this, but let's make an attempt. Let's take a listen.
But I am, of course, the dynamic there in terms of geopolitics and the war in the Middle East is very different than people expressing their First Amendment right to protest.
Well, yes, but I also think that what people are starting to see, at least in the occupation of Palestine, is just an increasing crisis of humanitarian condition. And that to me is just where I tend to come from on this issue.
You use the term the occupation of Palestine. What did you mean by that?
I think what I meant is like the settlements that are increasing in some of these areas and places where Palestinians are experiencing difficulty in access to their housing and homes.
Do you think you can expand on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd also just, I am not the expert on geopolitics on this issue.
So if this is something you don't know about, you don't first fail and then say, I'm not actually an expert, right? You say right away, this is a complex issue, this affects a lot of people, and quite frankly, I'm still working out exactly what my policy ideas are here, but what I do know is that I want to deal with the conditions that are afflicting Palestinians, and I also want to deal... You say something as opposed to saying things that are just so obviously vague, unclear, and uninformed. And I do find it annoying when after face planting, somebody says, but I'm not even an expert on this. When Candace Owens did this in her conversation with Joe Rogan about climate change, I said, don't say a bunch of crazy, uninformed stuff and then say, but I don't even really know about this, so you can't hold me accountable. I am not showing you this because I disagree with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's view on any particular issue. I agree with her that repression of Palestinian rights in the areas occupied by Israel is a crisis. I'm in favor of working to end that immediately. What I am telling you is that what we don't want to do in general is let people skate by as so-called progressives without actually knowing stuff merely because we like their personality or their talking points or their identity or the excitement that's generated around them for whatever reason. Trump won not because of his views on policy or trade or whatever. He won by catalyzing some really horrible people around xenophobic ideology. On the left, we've got to call people out when they're just wrong. She was clueless on this. The Simon Wiesenthal Center called her out, saying, road to hell paved with good intentions and scant knowledge. Happy to provide info to Alexandria, who knows zero about 3,500-year relationship of Jewish people to land of Israel. Jacobin magazine, or Jacobin, I'm not exactly sure how they pronounce it. It's a left-wing magazine, often very critical of Israeli foreign policy. They also said that this interview was not good and it's not doing anybody any favors. And this was my concern from the get-go. I've expressed concern that she's not totally clear exactly on what she means by democratic socialist, and earlier during this interview, she made predictions about capitalism coming to an end and saying the U.S. wasn't always a capitalist country wasn't always having capitalist roots. It wasn't clear what history she was pulling from. So I'm not saying she's a bad person. I'm not saying she has bad intentions. I'm not saying she made the wrong decisions on many issues as an elected official, as a potential elected official. What I am saying is that from the first interviews I saw with her, I perceived her depth of knowledge to be very limited on a range of issues. And I'm simply wondering whether, thinking about whether this progressive blue wave that we want, are we satisfied with candidates with this degree of knowledge, or do we want people who are more involved? And I know you go to the polls with the candidates you have, not the candidates you wish to have, but why not work on getting even better candidates if you can? And if you're going to respond to me, please none of the Pacman is a Zionist shill stuff. I agree with her on a lot of the substance. This isn't about that. You know I call it like I see it, and whoever I disagree with, I'm going to tell you. Tell me where she demonstrated depth of knowledge on the issue. We're out of time today. Great bonus show. Sorry, no voicemail. We'll get to it all tomorrow. Appreciate you watching and listening.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.